Dr. Ifland, you mentioned, you said that sugar is more addictive than cocaine. So how does sugar hijack the brain? Let's talk about the brain. What's happening in the brain?
Okay.
So and also, if you don't mind, when we say sugar, what are we talking about?
We're talking about anything with a intense sweet taste. And for somebody who's really sensitive, even unprocessed high sugar fruits, like tropical fruits, cherries, grapes, even high sugar fruits will trigger cravings. Why? Because they will trigger the reward brain cells to release a lot of craving neurotransmitters. So there are three parts of the brain in a classical addiction. There are three main parts of the brain that are altered. And then in the case of food addiction, there's a fourth section of the brain that makes food addiction much more powerful than a drug addiction or alcohol addiction in terms of being a difficulty in making it stop. So the first section is the reward pathways. They're hypersensitive. They're hyper reactive. They will just gush out a flood of cravings in the brain under cueing. So cueing is triggering, reminding, stimulating. It's the sight, sound, smell. It's a reminder or anything associated with the food. So if you always go out with your friend on the weekend and you have some ooey gooey treat, just seeing that friend by association will trigger that flood. So you have these hypersensitive, reactive reward centers. That's serotonin, dopamine, opiate, and cannabinoid. They're distinct centers, and because there's so many different substances, there's sugar, there's flour, there's gluten, there's excessive salt, there's dairy, there's excessive fats, there's caffeine, and there are food additives. All in a food addicted person, all four of those pathways are hypersensitive. And it makes it even more difficult to put the addiction into remission. So that's one part of the brain. You have a hyperactive, a hypersensitive reward centers. Now, when the brain is so beautifully engineered, when you get that euphoria, the body goes into alarm. It says, whether you're an evolutionist or a creationist, this is the same in both fields of thought, is you're not safe. If you're in this euphoric out of it state, you're not safe. The saber-toothed tiger could get you, a neighboring tribe could kidnap you. You're not safe. So the brain attempts to bring you back down to earth by activating the stress pathway. So now you have a hypersensitive stress pathway, which is signaling the adrenal glands, release adrenaline, release adrenaline, release adrenaline. It's the technical name is corticotropin releasing factor, CRF pathway. So you have the addiction, and then you have this response. Now you have a hyperactive stress pathway. You have adrenal glands that are pumping out adrenaline all the time. The thing that's really interesting about this and tragic is that the reverse is also true. If somebody stresses you out, your boss yells at you, your kid acts out, you have a near miss on the highway, something stressful, your bank account is empty, any of those things, and you have a natural stress response, the the numbing reward center cells will kick off to make you feel better. So stress, and people talk about stress eating. It's not stress eating. It's stress that has activated the addictive eating. So that's area number 2 of the brain. Now, while all of this activity is going on in the midbrain, the frontal lobe, our brand new brain, only a couple 100,000 years old, is not getting blood supply. And this is chronic because people eat processed foods all day long, and they're eating more and more and more over time. So less and less blood flow is getting to the frontal lobe. You develop something called cognitive impairment. It's loss of executive function. It's attention span, learning, problem solving, decision making, impulse control, memory, emotional processing. And that those cells, they're just not being used because they don't have enough blood flow, they don't have enough nourishment, and they become weak. It's very hard to get them to activate and do their job. And you see this reflected in the culture. People have poor attention spans, they have learning difficulties, they have poor problem solving, they have poor decision making, they have poor impulse control, they have memory loss. Americans are eating today, and this is something that just goes up over time. They're eating 73% of their food in drugs. They're eating 73% of their food in substances that do those three things. Now, in the case of processed food addiction, there's a fourth area of the brain that is altered, and that is food seeking. Why? Because this high fructose corn syrup converts to fat so easily, people develop fat under their skin, subcutaneous fat. And they go to diet programs, and diet programs say, oh, eat 1,200 calories or fast, or starve yourself, or eat 800 calories, or eat 400 calories. And the brain interprets that as famine. Never before in the history of the world have people been starving when there's enough food. So the primitive brain, the reptilian brain, the part of the brain that's 7 million years old, that part of the brain says, oh, there's only one explanation for being hungry all the time. Well, it must be a famine. So let's really gear up our food seeking. So it's two different mechanisms of brain. One is the addiction. Every time you have that flood, it's followed by a crash. The crash is incredibly uncomfortable, and you will go out and you will seek drugs to correct the crash, to come out of that pit. And now you have a second mechanism, which is fear of famine, food seeking. It's terrible. People become, all they can think about is food, 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 food. They lose their lives. You know, they look like they're functioning, they're getting up, they're getting dressed. I don't know how they do it, because now they're also sick. And they go to work and they take care of their children. It's just amazing. They're the real heroes of our culture. But in fact, all they can think about is food.